You are standing on the edge of losing something real, not because it lacks strength, but because it carries a kind of power that is difficult to fully comprehend. This person genuinely loves you, not in the predictable way you may have imagined, and not in a way that always feels comfortable, but in a way that is actively reshaping something within you. And that is exactly why a part of you feels the urge to pull away. Love is often believed to be something that arrives with immediate calmness, safety, and emotional ease. In reality, deep connection rarely begins that way. It often enters your life by unsettling your inner world first. When someone truly matters to you, your internal balance shifts because something deeper than simple attraction is being activated. This sense of disruption is not a sign that the connection is wrong. It is often a sign that it is real. When the mind encounters something significant, it does not always respond with clarity. It starts to analyze, question, and sometimes resist what is happening. This does not mean the feeling is false. It usually means the feeling is strong enough to challenge the patterns you have been living by for a long time. Real connection does not just stay on the surface of emotion, it reaches into the background of your inner world where old experiences, unprocessed feelings, and quiet fears have been sitting for years. When someone gets close enough to touch those deeper layers, your reaction is rarely calm. Instead, it can feel like emotional pressure, confusion, or internal tension. You may interpret this as a warning sign, as if something is wrong with the person in front of you. But in many cases, what is being triggered is not danger from them, but recognition within you. Your system is simply trying to process something that feels meaningful and unfamiliar at the same time. This is one of the reasons real love can feel so unsettling. It does not only connect you to another person, it also brings you into contact with yourself. It exposes the internal conflict between your desire for closeness and your need for independence. That tension is not proof of incompatibility. It is proof that something inside you is being activated at a deeper level than ordinary relationships usually reach. Love is not only about bonding with someone else. It also becomes a mirror that reflects parts of you that are usually hidden. It reveals the distance between what you consciously say you need and what your deeper emotional self actually longs for. Because of this, many people misinterpret their reactions and step back, believing they are avoiding a mistake. In reality, they may be stepping away from an experience that could have led to significant inner growth. What feels like disturbance is often a form of activation. Something within you is being stirred, something that cannot stay exactly the same once it has been touched. When affection becomes genuine and consistent, it does not stay limited to the surface of awareness. It moves deeper into areas of the psyche where unspoken fears and unacknowledged desires exist side by side. At that level, love does not feel simple anymore. It begins to awaken emotional material that has been quiet for a long time. Fears related to vulnerability, rejection, or losing control start to rise. At the same time, desires for emotional safety, acceptance, and being fully understood also become stronger. These two forces begin to move at once, one pulling you toward connection and the other pulling you toward protection. This inner conflict is not random. The person who triggers it often represents something that connects directly to parts of you that have not been fully integrated. They do not create these emotions inside you, but they bring them closer to the surface where you can finally notice them. In this sense, the relationship becomes less about the other person alone and more about what they awaken within your internal world. That is why emotional intensity can feel so overwhelming. It is easy to assume that strong feelings automatically mean instability or confusion, but intensity often points to psychological significance. When a connection generates powerful emotions, whether longing, anxiety, excitement, or fear, it usually means that something meaningful has been touched inside you. The mind does not invest that much energy without a reason. This intensity is not only about the present moment or the person in front of you. It is also connected to past emotional experiences and old internal stories that have shaped how you relate to closeness. When all of these layers become active at once, the emotional response can feel amplified, as if everything is happening at the same time. That is why your attention keeps returning to the person, not just because of attraction, but because something inside you is trying to understand what has been awakened. It can feel consuming because part of you is pulled outward toward the connection, while another part turns inward, trying to make sense of the emotional shift. This creates a sense of urgency, as if something important is unfolding that cannot be ignored. But intensity itself is not proof of harmony or long-term stability. It is proof of significance. It highlights where you are emotionally open, where you are sensitive, and where something unresolved still exists within you. Many people try to suppress this intensity because it feels uncomfortable or destabilizing, but avoiding it often means missing the message it carries. The emotional charge is not just noise, it is information. It points toward areas of your inner world that are active and asking to be understood rather than avoided. True love does not simply reinforce the identity you already hold, it challenges it. It places pressure on the way you define yourself and reveals where that identity may have been built more for protection than for truth. When someone truly connects with you, they do not only respond to the version of yourself you consciously present. They also respond to deeper layers that you may not fully recognize or accept yet. This is where the discomfort often comes from. You may see yourself in one way, independent, guarded, self-reliant. But a real emotional bond can bring forward different needs that exist underneath that image. Needs for closeness, emotional safety, or being fully seen can surface in ways that feel unfamiliar or even contradictory to your self-perception. These contradictions create tension because they challenge the stability of how you understand yourself. Identity tends to become structured over time through experience and defense. Love introduces movement into that structure. It disrupts the fixed version of who you think you are and invites something more flexible, more honest, and more integrated. This process can feel uncomfortable because identity is tied to a sense of control and predictability. When it is questioned, even gently, the instinct is often to resist. But what love is doing in these moments is not breaking you down. It is revealing where you are capable of expanding into a fuller version of yourself. Soul Archetypes recognizes this process not as confusion, but as transformation. The discomfort, the pull, the fear, and the intensity are all part of something deeper unfolding beneath the surface. You may start to interpret this discomfort as a warning that something is wrong with the relationship itself, when in reality it is often the result of your internal structure being pushed toward change and expansion. The person who truly loves you becomes a kind of catalyst in this process. Their presence does not simply fit into your existing emotional patterns, it challenges them. It draws you toward a version of yourself that is more integrated, where strength and vulnerability, certainty and openness, control and surrender can exist together without contradiction. The fear of losing someone does not always reflect what is actually happening in the relationship. More often, it reflects the emotional importance that person has taken on inside your inner world. Once someone becomes deeply meaningful, your mind begins to project forward and imagine their absence even while they are still present. This anticipation creates a subtle but powerful anxiety that can distort how you interpret the connection, making it feel unstable even when nothing concrete has changed. This reaction is rooted in a protective function of the mind. When someone is registered as emotionally significant, they are also registered as someone whose loss would carry impact. From that moment, the psyche begins to simulate possibilities of separation, distance, or rejection, not as a prediction of reality, but as preparation for emotional impact. It is an internal rehearsal designed to reduce shock if something were ever to go wrong. The difficulty is that this protective system does not always stay in the background. The emotional signals generated by fear can start to feel like evidence. Small shifts in tone, response time, or attention may be interpreted as signs of disconnection. In that state, perception becomes filtered through anxiety rather than clarity, and the relationship can begin to feel uncertain even when it remains stable. What makes this even more complex is that fear of loss does not weaken attachment, it deepens it. The more emotionally significant someone becomes, the more the mind tries to protect that connection. This creates a loop where attachment and fear reinforce each other. The bond feels more important and at the same time more fragile. Emotional sensitivity increases and the system becomes more reactive to any perceived change. At its core, this experience is not a sign of instability in the relationship. It is evidence of emotional investment. It shows that the connection has moved beyond surface-level interest and has been integrated into your internal sense of security and emotional balance. Another layer of this process comes from projection. In the early stages of connection, we rarely perceive another person purely as they are. Instead, the mind fills in what is unknown with internal material, past experiences, unmet emotional needs, hidden desires, and unresolved patterns. This happens unconsciously, meaning you are not actively choosing it. You are seeing the other person through both their reality and your inner world at the same time. Because of this, attraction is never only about the person in front of you. It is also about what they represent internally. They may come to symbolize safety, emotional relief, validation, or even transformation. These meanings are not consciously assigned. They arise from deeper psychological layers seeking expression. This is why early emotional intensity can feel disproportionate to what is objectively present. The emotional charge is amplified by projection, which makes the connection feel larger, more significant, or sometimes more threatening than it actually is. The other person becomes a kind of psychological surface where inner material is temporarily placed and experienced through them. As time passes and real interaction continues, reality begins to assert itself more clearly. The actual personality of the other person becomes more visible, and this often creates tension. The projected image starts to collide with what is genuinely there. This can lead to disappointment, confusion, or emotional withdrawal, not necessarily because anything has gone wrong, but because the projection can no longer hold its original form. Yet projection is not simply distortion, it is also a bridge between the unconscious and conscious mind. When recognized, it becomes a powerful way of understanding yourself. The emotional responses you feel toward another person often reveal as much, if not more, about your inner world than about them. Love, in this sense, acts like a mirror. It reflects parts of you that have not yet been fully acknowledged or integrated. When a meaningful connection forms, it engages not only your conscious personality, but also deeper emotional material that may have been suppressed or left unprocessed. This is why relationships often feel so revealing. They bring hidden internal dynamics into direct experience. Conflicts that once existed quietly within you, without clear form, begin to appear in real time through interaction. A person may feel both deeply drawn to closeness and simultaneously afraid of dependence. They may want emotional honesty while also maintaining protective distance. These opposing forces can exist at the same time beneath awareness, but intimacy brings them into visibility. When someone becomes emotionally significant, they naturally activate these internal contradictions. Your reactions are then shaped not only by who they are, but also by what they awaken in you. Anxiety, idealization, irritation, or withdrawal are not always direct responses to the other person. They can also be expressions of internal conflict being stimulated by closeness. This is what makes emotional connection feel destabilizing at times. It removes the illusion that your inner world is always consistent and settled. What once felt organized within you begins to surface through lived experience. Psychological tension becomes emotional reality instead of remaining abstract. But this exposure is not accidental. It creates awareness. By bringing internal conflicts to the surface, relationships force you to encounter parts of yourself that were previously unconscious or avoided. The emotional intensity surrounding love is often the signal that these deeper layers are now active and cannot remain hidden in the same way. Avoidance in this context is rarely simple disinterest. More often, it is a form of psychological protection against emotional exposure. When a connection starts to feel significant, vulnerability naturally increases. With greater emotional investment comes greater potential for pain, rejection, disappointment, or loss. To manage this risk, the mind creates distance. Avoidance can appear in subtle forms: reduced communication, emotional withdrawal, overthinking the relationship, or suddenly focusing on perceived flaws in the other person. These patterns are not random. They are strategies designed to regain a sense of control when emotional intensity feels overwhelming. Yet even this distancing does not erase the connection. It only reveals how deeply it has already been felt internally and how much it matters within your psychological system. These behaviors are not necessarily proof that a connection is weak. More often, they signal that the emotional stakes have risen to a level that the internal system struggles to hold comfortably. Avoidance, in this sense, becomes a pressure release mechanism, something the psyche uses when emotional intensity starts to exceed what feels safe or manageable. At a deeper level, avoidance is closely tied to fear of vulnerability. Emotional closeness requires exposure without control over how you are perceived, received, or responded to. For someone who has lived through emotional inconsistency, rejection, or instability in the past, that kind of openness can feel inherently risky. The mind retains emotional memory. It remembers what hurt, what destabilized it, and what felt unsafe. In response, it often tries to prevent repetition of that pain by creating distance before anything similar can happen again. But this protective strategy carries a contradiction within it. While avoidance can temporarily reduce emotional discomfort, it also interrupts the very connection that carries meaning and depth. A person may feel immediate relief after pulling away, yet that relief is often accompanied by confusion or a subtle sense of emptiness, as if something important has been held at arm's length rather than resolved. In many situations, avoidance is not truly about rejecting the other person. It is about struggling with the intensity of one's own emotional response. It reflects an internal conflict between the desire for closeness and the need for safety. And in moments of overwhelm, safety tends to take priority, even when the connection itself holds real significance. Emotional resistance often appears when a bond begins to carry more meaning than the psyche feels ready to fully process. On the surface, this can look like doubt, hesitation, or emotional withdrawal from the other person. But underneath, it is usually a form of internal friction created by depth itself. When feelings become stronger, the mind does not always move smoothly toward acceptance. Instead, it generates resistance as a way of rebalancing internal stability. This resistance emerges because real emotional involvement reduces distance. The other person is no longer just an external presence. They begin to occupy psychological space, influencing thoughts, emotional states, and expectations. That shift can feel destabilizing, especially for someone not used to sustained emotional openness. Resistance then acts as an attempt to regain control over what suddenly feels too intense or too consuming. At a deeper level, emotional resistance is shaped by conditioning from past experiences. If closeness has previously been linked with disappointment, inconsistency, or emotional pain, the mind learns to associate attachment with risk. Even when the present situation is different, those emotional imprints remain active in the background. As a result, resistance may arise not because of what is happening now, but because of what it unconsciously resembles. This is what makes resistance feel so contradictory. A person can feel genuine attraction while simultaneously finding reasons to pull away. These opposing impulses are not evidence of confusion about the other person's value. They are signs of an internal system attempting to regulate emotional exposure and maintain a tolerable level of closeness. What makes this dynamic particularly important is that resistance often increases with attachment. The more meaningful the connection becomes, the stronger the internal pushback can feel. This does not automatically indicate incompatibility. More often, it indicates activation. Something within the person is being stirred that requires awareness rather than immediate rejection. Growth in relationships does not occur in emotional comfort alone. It happens when comfort is disrupted and deeper awareness is triggered. A meaningful connection often acts as a catalyst, revealing emotional patterns that were previously unconscious or unexamined. In this sense, relationships are not just about bonding with another person, but about encountering yourself through that bond. Confronting discomfort means staying present with emotions that would normally lead to withdrawal. These may include insecurity, jealousy, fear of abandonment, or the anxiety of being fully seen. Instead of immediately reacting to these feelings by escaping or rationalizing them, growth involves observing them as signals rather than threats. This shift is subtle, but it changes the entire emotional experience. from something that controls you into something you can begin to understand. Discomfort in relationships is often misread as a sign that something is wrong externally, yet much of it originates internally. It appears when new emotional experiences challenge older psychological structures, structures that were originally built for protection but may no longer support deeper intimacy or self-awareness. Recognizing this is part of understanding when those internal defenses are no longer serving growth. This process is not linear. It unfolds in cycles, moments of insight followed by resistance, clarity followed by emotional tension. Each time discomfort is faced instead of avoided, emotional capacity expands. Over time, what once felt overwhelming becomes more integrated and less threatening. Ultimately, relational growth depends on the willingness to stay engaged during inner conflict. It requires moving beyond the reflex to escape discomfort and instead using it as information about unresolved parts of the self. In doing so, the relationship becomes more than an external experience. It becomes a space where inner transformation unfolds through lived emotional reality. The psyche does not develop in isolation. It moves toward wholeness through relationship because another person provides a living context where hidden or fragmented parts of the self can be activated and recognized. When a meaningful connection forms, it often brings forward aspects of the psyche that have remained outside conscious awareness, disowned emotions, suppressed desires, or undeveloped inner capacities. Wholeness in this sense is not perfection or completion, it is integration. Human beings naturally develop certain traits more strongly, while others remain underdeveloped or suppressed, often due to early experiences and conditioning. Over time, this creates internal imbalance. Some parts of the self are expressed clearly, while others remain dormant. A relationship becomes a mirror that reflects these missing or underdeveloped aspects. Strong emotional reactions toward another person often point toward inner material that is seeking recognition. What feels intensely attractive, irritating, or emotionally charged is rarely random. It often marks areas where integration is possible. This can feel destabilizing because it challenges the fixed identity that provides a sense of stability and control. As new emotional material surfaces, the self-concept begins to shift. What once felt solid becomes more fluid, requiring re-evaluation and adjustment. The drive toward wholeness is not a conscious decision. It is a deeper psychological movement that expresses itself through attraction, conflict, projection, and emotional intensity. Each meaningful interaction becomes a doorway through which unconscious material enters awareness. In this way, connection is not only about companionship or attachment, it is also about psychological development. Through emotional engagement, the psyche gradually moves toward greater integration, where previously divided aspects of experience begin to coexist within a broader, more flexible sense of self. Letting go too early often happens when emotional intensity is mistaken for instability or when discomfort is interpreted as incompatibility. But early withdrawal from a meaningful connection can interrupt a process that has not yet fully unfolded. At the beginning of any significant emotional bond, reactions are naturally amplified. Uncertainty, vulnerability, and resistance can blur perception and make it difficult to accurately interpret the connection itself. These reactions are not always reliable indicators of reality. They are often signs of internal adjustment as the psyche integrates new emotional input. When someone pulls away too quickly, the response is often driven more by temporary internal discomfort than by the actual state of the connection. This can lead to missed opportunities for clarity, understanding, and emotional resolution. Psychological integration requires time. New emotional experiences need space to align with existing inner structures. When that process is interrupted too early, it can reinforce avoidance patterns, training the mind to escape discomfort rather than understand it. Over time, this can reduce emotional tolerance and make future connections feel more difficult to sustain. However, staying does not mean forcing a connection or ignoring genuine incompatibility. It means allowing enough time for emotional signals to settle so they can be understood beyond their initial intensity. The key difference lies in whether the response is driven by reactive emotion or reflective awareness. When emotional processes are allowed to unfold naturally, they often move from confusion toward clarity. What initially feels overwhelming can gradually become understandable, provided the experience is not cut short before its meaning has fully emerged within the inner psychological landscape.